Think about the biggest project you have underway right now: the implementation of the new system, the plant, the expansion, the migration, the complete redesign of the product. Now give me one number. What is the probability that it will finish within budget, within schedule, and delivering the benefits you promised when it was approved? The measured answer is 0.5%, 1 in 200. The number comes from Flyvbjerg, an Oxford professor whom the accounting network KPMG called the world's leading megaproject expert. He has spent decades building a database that today exceeds 16,000 projects in 136 countries, across more than 20 different types. And what that database says is this: only 8.5% of projects meet both budget and schedule, and barely 0.5% also deliver the benefits they promised. Let me translate that into the language of your executive committee. 99.5% of projects miss something. Doing what you said you were going to do should be routine. It almost never happens. A note of honesty from the first minute, because we will maintain it throughout the video. Those two figures, 8.5% and 0.5%, come from the book and from statements by the author himself. His database is private, and those specific percentages do not appear in a peer-reviewed article. I use them attributed to him, not as an independent fact. When I cite something verified in a primary source, I will tell you that too. And here is the thesis that makes this video different from everything you have heard about project management. Your project does not fail during execution. It fails the day you estimate it. Delay and cost overrun are always measured against a forecast. And if the forecast was born wrong, your team can execute flawlessly and still fail. The root cause lies outside delivery, in the forecast, months or years before anyone lifts a shovel. The textbook case is in California. In 2008, voters approved a high-speed rail system, bonds for nearly $10 billion, a trip between San Francisco and Los Angeles set by law at 2 hours and 40 minutes, and a promised ticket of about $50. The official estimate for the full system, according to the analysis by the State Legislative Analyst's Office, was about $45 billion. The business plan published by the authority itself in February 2026 puts the first phase at $126 billion, with full service projected for 2040. Almost 20 years after the vote, no one has taken the trip. Why are estimates this bad? Former San Francisco Mayor Willie Brown explained it in the Chronicle in 2013 with brutal honesty. The first budget for a public works project is, in reality, a down payment. If people knew the true cost from the beginning, nothing would ever get approved. Start digging the hole, he said, and make it so big that there is no alternative but to get the money to fill it. That is not exotic political corruption. That happens in your company every time someone paints the business case. So the committee will say yes. Let's go to the 3 playbooks. Playbook number 1, the forecast. When you estimate a project, you do, almost without realizing it, one of 2 things. The first is called the inside view. You look at your project, its particularities, your team, your plan, and build the number from the inside. That is what practically everyone does. The second is called the outside view. You stop looking at your project and look at the class it belongs to, all the similar projects that have already been done, and use what actually happened to them as your starting point. The difference is enormous, and the reason is mechanical. When you estimate from the inside, you start with a number that sounds reasonable to you, an anchor, and adjust it. The problem is that the anchor hijacks you. Tversky and Kahneman demonstrated it in an experiment published in Science in 1974. They spun a wheel of fortune in front of participants and then asked them what percentage of United Nations member countries were African. When the wheel stopped at 10, the median answer was 25%. When it stopped at 65, the median rose to 45. A casino wheel with no information at all moved estimates by 20 points. Now think about the anchor your team uses, the last vendor quote, the number the boss said out loud, the budget that has to fit. That anchor decides your project more than your analysis does. The outside view fixes this because base rates are actual outcomes, not estimates. They already include everything that went wrong in those projects, including the surprises no one could predict. You do not need to know what they were. They are inside the number. And here is the fact that turns this from an interesting idea into a professional standard, and this one is verified in a primary government source. The British Treasury requires, in its Green Book supplementary guidance, explicit and empirically based adjustments to project costs, benefits, and schedules. and the Department for Transport document from 2020 that updates those optimism bias uplifts explicitly names Flyvbjerg's database as its reference source. The uplifts it sets at final business case stage are these: rail 19%, roads 16%, buildings 13%, fixed links 20%. This is not a consultant's opinion. It has been mandatory public policy in the United Kingdom for years, and in technology, where most of your projects live. Here I use the reviewed figures, not the books. Flyvbjerg and Alexander Budzier published in Harvard Business Review in 2011 an analysis of 1,471 technology projects. The average cost overrun was 27%, but 1 in 6 projects turned out to be a black swan, with an average cost overrun of 200% and a delay of almost 70%. 1 in 6. That is your base rate when you approve an ERP. And in his database, the project type with the highest average cost overrun is nuclear waste storage at 238%. The Olympic Games exceed 170% on average, according to the peer-reviewed study. Your common mistake: presenting a number built from the inside, adjusted until it is approvable. Your practical action, and it fits into one afternoon: name the class your project belongs to. ERP migrations in companies our size, plant openings, product line launches. Get 5 to 10 real cases from your own company or your industry and calculate what percentage went over and by how much. That number, not yours, is your starting point. And then the question Flyvbjerg puts on the boardroom table: with this risk, can we afford it? And if not, do we walk away or reduce it? Playbook number 2. The cheap plan. You now have an honest forecast. Now comes the second decision, and it is counterintuitive for any operator with a bias for action. How much time do you spend planning before you commit? The book's rule can be summarized in 4 words. Think slow, act fast. And the reason is purely economic. Ask yourself, what is the worst thing that can happen during planning? Someone erases the whiteboard. You throw version 4 of the design in the trash. Now ask yourself, what is the worst thing that can happen during execution? The boring machine floods the tunnel. The migration corrupts the production database. You have to dynamite months of work. Planning is cheap and safe. Delivery is expensive and dangerous. Therefore, everything that can be resolved during planning has to be resolved there. And there is a second reason, deeper. Time is risk. Think of the duration of your project as an open window. The longer it stays open, the more opportunities there are for something to come through it. A crisis, a change in leadership, a pandemic, an interest rate increase, a competitor. A slow and rigorous plan does not lengthen the project. It shortens it, because it allows you to execute quickly and close the window. How do you really plan? With simulation and iteration, not documents. Pixar goes through the full cycle: script, storyboard, complete version screened to an internal audience, criticism, throw out what does not work, about 8 times before production. The movie you see in theaters is approximately the 9th version. Frank Gehry does the same thing with buildings. Physical models, then a complete digital model, what today we would call a digital twin. In a literal sense, the Guggenheim Bilbao was built completely and successfully first inside a computer. And Gehry has a contractual rule you should steal. His firm does not allow the client to start construction until they are sure the building fits within its budget and meets its requirements. The contrast between 2 buildings says everything. The Guggenheim Bilbao opened in October 1997. According to the authors themselves, delivered on time and about 3% under the $100 million budget. In its first 3 years, it received almost 4 million visitors and generated about 500 million euros of economic activity in a declining industrial region. And the Sydney Opera House, budgeted at $7 million Australian dollars, with delivery scheduled for December 1963. It cost $102 million. It opened in October 1973. 14 years instead of 5 and a cost overrun of more than 1,300%. Its architect, Jørn Utzon, resigned in February 1966, left Sydney, and never returned. He died without seeing the most famous building he designed completed. The difference between the two was not talent. It was that one solved the problems in the model and the other left them to be solved on site. Your common mistake: approving a project with known unknowns still pending resolution during execution. That is not agility. It is transferring your cheap problems into the expensive phase. Your practical action, before signing the next major commitment, demand the maximum virtual product, the most detailed and realistic simulation you can build with what you already have. A prototype, a single-site pilot, a functional mock-up, a simulation of the entire end-to-end process. And one question as an approval criterion: is there anything left to discover that we will discover during execution? If the answer is yes, you are not ready to sign yet. Playbook number 3, the Lego. You now have an honest forecast and a tested plan. The third decision is how you deliver. And here is the most powerful mechanism in the book, the one that turns dangerous projects into boring projects. The question is this: is your project one enormous thing or one small thing repeated many times? That distinction predicts risk better than almost any other variable. One enormous thing projects: a nuclear power plant, an Olympic Games, a dam, a monolithic information system, live in the dangerous part of the distribution where disasters are not slightly worse than average, but several times worse. Modular projects, solar farms, wind farms, server farms, roads, pipelines, are the ones that perform best. And the reason is not luck, it is repetition. When you build the same unit many times, each repetition is faster, cheaper, and better than the previous one. That is called the learning curve. And if the first unit fails, you fail small, learn, and correct, instead of discovering the failure when you have already committed the entire budget. The Empire State Building is the perfect example, and it is verified. It was built between March 1930 and May 1931, 13.5 months of construction. It cost $40,900,000 against a $50 million budget, about 18% under. How? The architect designed the floors to be as similar as possible to one another, many of them identical. The crews did not build one 102-story building. They built 102 one-story buildings. Each floor taught the next one. The second case is the one that most resembles a real business project. The Madrid Metro between 1995 and 2003, under the direction of Manuel Melis. They modularized two things. First, the stations, 76 stations with the same simple, clean, functional design instead of 76 signature works. Second, and this is the brilliant part, the tunnel itself. They calculated how many kilometers one tunnel boring machine with its crew could excavate in a typical cycle, divided the total by that number, and contracted as many machines and crews as necessary to meet the deadline. They had as many as 6 working at the same time, unheard of then. Result? 131 kilometers of track and 76 stations in 2 4-year stages. For calibration, London's Jubilee Line extension from the same era cost almost 10 times more per mile. And one rule Madrid applied that you should copy: proven technology only, no first-time use. This is not only infrastructure. Tesla built its gigafactory like Lego blocks. One small factory operating, then another beside it, integrated. It began producing batteries and generating revenue shortly after announcing it, instead of waiting for the full building. Tim Cook described construction of Apple's campus by saying they saw it as a manufacturing project, doing everything possible off-site, and then you start putting Legos together. Your common mistake? Designing the project as a monolith that only delivers value on the day of the big launch while also introducing unproven technology along the way. Your practical action. Answer in writing what your Lego is. What is the smallest unit of your project that can be built, delivered, and measured by itself? One store, one branch, one module, one country, one team, one microservice? Build it first, measure it, correct it, and only then repeat it. Let's close the system, because the 3 playbooks are one single sequence. The forecast gave you the honest number, the outside view, your reference class and its base rate, instead of your own anchor adjusted until it becomes approvable. The cheap plan gave you the discipline to solve problems where they are inexpensive. Simulation, iteration, and the rule not to sign while there is still something left to discover. And the Lego gave you delivery. One small, repeated unit that climbs the learning curve and quickly closes the window of risk. Think slow, act fast. In that order, and never the reverse. The honest warnings, which here always go on camera. First, the book's headline figures, 8.5% and 0.5%, depend on a private database and do not appear in peer-reviewed literature. I use them attributed to the author, and several specific figures in the book did not hold up under verification. The technology project cost overrun percentage it cites could not be located in his own academic papers, which is why I gave you the figures published in Harvard Business Review. And the original cost of California's rail system mentioned in the book is lower than the figure in the official 2008 record. Second, the author himself received a published academic rebuttal when he challenged Hirschman's hiding hand thesis, and he responded, "The debate is still alive." Third, there is an obvious success case bias. Bilbao, Madrid, and the Empire State are examples the author admires or participated in, and there is no symmetrical count of modular projects that failed. None of this knocks down the system. The outside view, cheap simulation, and modularity stand on their own, and they are backed by British public policy. But use them as discipline, not as a guarantee. Your immediate action, tomorrow, on the biggest project you currently have open. 1. Write down the class it belongs to and find 5 to 10 real comparable cases. Write down how far they went over. That is your new starting point, and the conversation you will have with your committee will be uncomfortable and honest. 2. Make a list of everything that today is still pending to be figured out along the way, and decide what can be simulated, piloted, or prototyped before committing the budget. 3. Define your Lego and which unit you are going to build first in order to learn from it. And stop doing 3 things. Approving estimates built only from the inside, committing budget with open unknowns, and introducing unproven technology into your critical project. There is only one sign that you already govern your projects. When someone presents you with a plan, your first question stops being, "How much does it cost?" and becomes, "How much did it cost the people who already did it?" And the question for the comments, because I want to hear from real operators. What was your last project that went over budget? And if you are honest, at what moment was it doomed? During construction? Or the day someone wrote the number? Tell me below. On this channel, we turn business books into executable systems. If you approve projects, stay close.